Damien McCarthy's 2020 debut psychological supernatural horror Caveat is one of, if not the scariest films to come out of Ireland. It tells the story of Isaac, a timid, quiet man suffering from amnesia as a result of a brain injury, who is hired by his mysterious landlord Mo to babysit his emotionally disturbed niece Olga at his late brother's island home. However, as the title implies, the caveat is that by the apparent request of Olga, Isaac is required to wear a harness that tethers him to the house, all except for Olga's bedroom, due to her paranoia and fears of being attacked in her sleep. From here, startling shenanigans begin to ensue as Isaac slowly attempts to recover memories of his past, while unearthing the strange circumstances of the house, and of course the suspicious motive behind Mo's arrangement. It's hard to say much out the gate without giving it away, but Caveat is a proper classical ghost story that modernizes its gothic expressionistic roots to deliver one of the most frighteningly minimalistic films I can recommend to anyone wanting a pure back-to-basics haunting. While his sophomore follow-up Oddity did not quite click with me in the same way, there's no doubt McCarthy is slowly positioning himself as one of the more interesting and underrated niche horror filmmakers to emerge in the 2020s. In fact, his upcoming third feature Hokum is probably my current most anticipated horror film of 2026. In the same vein as the Raka Raka brothers Talk to Me and Bring Her Back, both of McCarthy's films exist in a shared universe that's pre-established long before we enter, positioning us as temporary tourists to each quietly intimate world built around fractured, gritty character dramas that never give us the full picture. The best way I can describe Caveat is like a jigsaw puzzle with several deliberately missing pieces. It's definitely not going to be for everyone due to its heavily ambiguous and convoluted storytelling, but it is all in service of keeping you constrained within Isaac's deeply fragile and damaged state of mind. If you're open-minded to not having all the answers, there's a lot to speculate beyond its very simplistic premise, as it slowly reveals its grimly macabre secrets layer by layer. So if you're curious, brace yourself. Now, before we dive deeper into despair, this video is sponsored by Raycon. Now that the holidays are over, it's the perfect time to upgrade your gear for the new year, especially if you're getting back into a fitness routine or simply becoming more active with some healthy quality time outdoors. I've been using Raycon's essential open earbuds for the past month, and they have made a huge difference to both my comfort and energy levels to get the most leisure and focus out of my daily routine. Unlike traditional earbuds, open earbuds lightly hook around your ear and don't block out anything around you, allowing you to stay aware of your surroundings and remain safe without compromising on sound quality. When I'm at the gym, open earbuds let me stay present with the motivational atmosphere while getting that extra helpful push through those tougher moments with crystal clear music that keeps me hyped. With a compact, comfortable, lightweight fit, open earbuds never fall out, and their 36 hours of battery using the charging case means I basically have them ready all the time, even when the moment is spontaneous. Right now, Raycon is ringing in the new year with a seal, so it's the perfect time to grab them today and join over 3 million other satisfied customers without the inflated price of big branded competitors. And heck, if you're not satisfied, Raycon offers a 30-day guarantee. The essential open earbuds are here to help you crush your new year goals like they will mine. Simply click the link in the description box below or go to buyraycon.com/RyanOpen to get 20% off site-wide today. What's paramount to our perspective going into Caveat is the abnormal sense of disconnect that permeates throughout. After establishing Isaac has been in a mysterious accident noted through the scar on the back of his head, it gives his perception of the world a constant haze that makes him, and thus the film, perpetually unreliable. If you've seen Oddity, you'll sort of know that Damien McCarthy's signature is to write every character with an unhealthy and conflicted state of mind, hence the bewildering and off-puttingly surreal aura Caveat evokes. As I said, the story will quite literally appear to lapse in time or fog any truly coherent understanding of what is going on to sustain the challenge of Isaac's mental impairment. Ironically, caveat probably works best when you don't overthink it, even if it does require a fair bit of hypothesizing to explain it. If it seems like a cryptically long-winded way to suggest something rather simple, that's likely because it is, which will understandably frustrate many. In the opening, we learn from Myuu that his brother Ed committed suicide and his wife, Olga's mother, has since gone missing, leaving Olga alone on the island home and in need of care, while Myuu finishes his affairs. Now, the thing is, the movie doesn't try to deceive you with this setup. Isaac is very glued into the fact that nothing seems right about this arrangement, but since he's still in recovery and in need of money, and also generally lacks in assertion, he agrees to the job, reluctantly so after getting to the island and being emotionally pressed into a corner with the caveat of being locked in the harness. Isaac is even quick to acknowledge the obvious subtext here. He's basically a dog on a leash, yet as he ruminates further on his forgotten past, the harness itself grows into a symbol of Isaac being literally chained to his past, and under the duress of a desperate living situation where his domineering landlord dangles the key over him, expecting Isaac to be an obedient pet. What I appreciate about the story having an introverted protagonist is that there's an inherent tension to Isaac being too submissive and non-confrontational to push back when compared to more instinctually hardened protagonists in most modern stories. What makes Isaac such a compelling character is that he's extremely enigmatic and ghostly in his own way, as he remains detached from the present due to his head trauma, almost as if he's the one haunting the house. In fact, the general synopsis you'll often see for the film constantly refers to Isaac as a drifter, yet in context to what we actually see, that's more of a suitably figurative way to describe him, as we do ultimately learn very little about him, even when revelations later become clear. Now, when it comes to the supernatural oddities, the film doesn't shy away from immediately pushing them across, as McCarthy is clearly indebted to the folklore of cursed objects, particularly this hideous drum-beating rabbit that effectively has a clairvoyant ability to guide itself towards the restless spirits of the deceased. But more on that later. I won't spoil every extremely well-executed slow burn scare, but one of the best early scenes is this completely incidental painting that just seems to have its own thing going on. It doesn't directly tie into the story per se, but what it does do is reinforce this ongoing theme across both caveat and oddity about how bad people invite bad energy into the world. There's no escaping the film's fierce play on Irish cultural superstition. To explain this, perhaps the most glaring red flag is the harness itself, which acts as a macabre totem for the story, after it's explained Olga's grandmother once used it due to her perpetual sleepwalking. When we take the iconography of chains, harnesses, a tattered and neglected old toy rabbit, a house in complete decay, the mother drawing ominous circles as her daughter's nose begins to bleed as if under a spell, and the shadowy domineering staging of Myuu's character, it creates this extremely strong visual association with abuse and control, as both Olga and Isaac share a visual duality as they experience similar situations. In fact, it never alludes to it, but I always loosely suspected there was a hint of trauma in Isaac's past that makes him feel a connection to Olga, and thus the reason he agrees to the harness after Myuu effectively offers him an out. In fact, based on my own tastes, what I find most striking about the mise-en-scene is how it evokes the same stylistic childhood nightmarishness as Matthew Holness's Possum, which much more directly highlighted its allegory for abuse, including its own inescapably cursed animal puppet. Hell, dare I say I was loosely reminded of a Fred and Rose West type situation where they're both evil bastard parents living in this dilapidated house completely cut off from civilization, with Myuu being their mainland representative. Of course, to anyone that appears obvious, but if I'm being honest, I think show don't tell is becoming a bit of a dying art form these days in a culture of people who want these things spoon-fed to them. The film never teaches us about the family's relationships, instead only giving us these small bits of of information in which to build our own harrowing picture. For example, Isaac asks if anyone else lives on the island, and Mo responds with only a family of foxes, whose crying sounds like a teenage girl screaming. There's something so distinctly chilling about this hyper-specific description that acts as an overt omen for the wickedness that surrounds the house's history, particularly with the relation to nature. After all, most Irish folklore is rooted in cautioning us not to disturb the natural land. There's a mystical self-preservation where it'll defend itself against the wickedness and tyranny of man should we intrude upon its slumber, so to speak. Thus, what we have is simply nature getting vengeance on human greed and corruption. It's deliberately a tale as old as time. I even covered similar themes in my video on the Hollow many years back, which dealt with the subject matter more directly. Like I said, you're left to piece together an unsolvable puzzle with thin threads of information which fit the context of domestic horrors that often happen behind closed doors and told through speculation and hearsay. Both Caveat and Oddity are presented like real stories that have become urban legends through years of reinterpretation, and the further we get away from the actual truth, the more real and even more tragic it becomes. I guess, just as another random example, you could think of it loosely like the unsolved 1922 Hinterkaifeck massacre, where there are so many clues, curious details, variables, and new information from new technology, and the immense speculation behind it that build up a complex crime scene, yet ultimately the actualities will never truly be known, thus the unceasingly restless aura that still lingers over that peculiar story. In short, the way I interpret McCarthy's framing device is that his stories are not told, but rather deconstructed and presented as dubious myths that you cannot fully trust. Okay, so to put this in perspective, we learn that Olga's mother used to bully her husband Ed and mock him for his intense claustrophobia, even allegedly locking him in the harness as a laugh, thus framing her as the abuser, at least initially. We then discover that after Ed mysteriously got locked in the basement one night, presumably by the mother, he shot himself with a crossbow out of unfathomable fear. Or at least that's one messy version of events, because again, you're never given an exact explanation for what actually happened, as each character has their own unreliable recollection or understanding that muddies the waters so much that no truth is ever certain. The only real horror we do know is that when Isaac follows the rabbit into the basement one night, he discovers Olga's mother's corpse buried behind the wall after she was shot with the very same crossbow. While Isaac initially thinks Olga may have done it, given her abnormal behavior, and the fact that one of his first impressions of her sees her wielding said crossbow, she soon accuses Isaac of being the one who locked Ed in the basement, leading to his suicide after Mo and Ed killed her mother. Inevitably, it's going to be divisive, but it goes back to what I said about the story being more of a deconstruction that creates a myth. When you compare what it tells us to what it leaves out, its storytelling is unassumingly intelligent, because it goes beyond the concept of less is more by having the confidence to take away what it could easily give to satisfy those in need of answers, which for me at least, creates a far more fascinating and enriching experience. The thing is, the film could have easily have thrown you a bone by saying, oh, the house is built on an ancient burial ground or something to that effect, but I think that would diminish the eeriness of its world building. The more unexplained details it leaves behind, the more engaging it is to discuss and theorize, opening the story to many viable interpretations. It's important to remember you're constantly contending with both Isaac's psychological impairment and a he-said, she-said understanding of events. Again, you're literally shackled to a hazy, unreliable past that Isaac can never fully remember, especially when he's only a pawn to a very particular incidental part of it. Unable to inform the authorities because he doesn't know where he is, Isaac calls Mo, who confirms that he did in fact lock Isaac in the basement, and maybe it's just the ingrained Irish Catholicism that I feel about these kinds of films, but the symbolism of being tethered to the house evokes a form of punishment where the guilty must atone for their sins. Let me explain. Given what I said about the story, one could even argue that the film deconstructs the myth of the Banshee somewhat. You have the grimly spirit woman whose wailing signals death upon the land, perhaps echoed by the howling foxes, as Mo puts it. There's the clairvoyant rabbit leading towards unfinished business. There's the judgmental painting of the little girl. It's not one singular entity that's haunting the land. The Banshee mythos is basically broken apart and scattered throughout the world, metastasizing the bad energy we create with negative actions like murder and abuse. With how entrenched the story is in the superstition of urban legends, it's basically a modern Irish parable about wrongdoing where those responsible face damnation for their misdeeds, where comeuppance is an inevitability. However, what's important here is that the spirit itself is not an evil force. It does not go after those who do not deserve it. It simply wants to dispel the human evil that created it. As Isaac begins to recollect, a flashback shows a cowardly Mo hire him to lock Ed in the basement, presumably because Mo was paranoid that Ed would feel guilt and inform the police about what they did, which was kill the mother, something of which Isaac never knew about, believing Ed's irrational claustrophobia will drive him to madness. It can be deduced that the reason Mo brought Isaac back to the house after his amnesia was to bait Olga into killing Isaac as vengeance for what happened to her parents, thus killing two birds with one stone, because Olga would then take the fall with her fingerprints being on the sole murder weapon that's also responsible for the deaths of her mother and father, and thus Mo would get away with zero connection to this bizarre isolated incident. If all of this sounds far-fetched and ludicrous, one way to justify it is referring to an interview with Moving Pictures Film Club where McCarthy highlighted Jeremy Saulnier's Blue Ruin as a key influence. I covered this in my Green Room video nearly 10 years ago about dumb decisions in horror movies when characters are put under pressure. Jeremy Saulnier's self-described haphazard trilogy, consisting of Murder Party, Blue Ruin, and Green Room, all focus on the impulse, instinct, and irrationality of the human condition, where we often expect stories to craft logical motives and reasoning, whereas in real life, rarely is this ever the case. It's not a plot hole for having dumb logic. Sometimes people simply make terrible, irrevocable decisions while ignorant of the consequences. Sometimes the motive is just that vague and impulsive and nothing more. The second half of the film focuses on Isaac freeing himself from the harness using a key found on the deceased mother, and eventually locking Olga in the harness during one of her episodes. However, a major recollection that proves Isaac's innocence is when he recalls going to the house in a bid to warn Ed about Mo's intentions, only to find Ed already locked in the basement and having seemingly shot himself, traumatizing Isaac to return home, where he's later confronted by Mo about the warning note after informing the police of his brother's suicide, leaving Isaac to question who locked Ed in the basement if not Mo. My strong suspicion here has always been that the Cursed Land was responsible for locking the door and allowing the vengeful spirit of the mother to ironically continue to torment Ed into suicide, which is more or less confirmed by the ending when the mother inevitably comes after Mo when he arrives on the island to solve his own unfinished business. We know his constant murderous intent is vividly clear because the final detail of Isaac's memory is seeing Mo push him off the balcony while intoxicated, thus explaining his brain damage. Now, there is one crucially subtle detail in Isaac's flashbacks that I feel greatly contextualizes his fragile state of mind prior to the accident itself, where we always see him wearing his brother's distinctive red jacket. We don't know anything about the circumstances of his brother, but I always took it as alluding to Isaac experiencing grief over his brother's possible death, leading to alcoholism, and thus the jacket itself becomes its own symbolic harness of another tragic past. Again, despite the information that the story omits or doesn't tell us, there's tremendous nuance to unearth if you engage with the unknown and look beyond the frame of what it shows. In fact, Isaac freeing himself and eventually the dog chained outside suggests a hopeful conclusion, a chance to finally break free from his past after finding atonement in indirectly acting as another pawn to the spirit to lure Mo in the same way he deviously lured in others. It is pure, perfect poetic irony. The story culminates in Isaac venturing through the walls of the house only to end up trapped with the brooding corpse of the mother, before eventually escaping while Olga incapacitates Mo and locks him in the basement to suffer the same fate as her father at the hands of the vengeful mother who gleefully mocks him in the same way she allegedly did to her husband. And with that, thank you so much for watching. Happy 2026, thank you for coming back. It's good that I can still keep making these videos. Until next time, stay safe, stay away from harnesses, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.